Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And let's begin with a quick update to US-China relations. President-elect Trump has appointed Howard Lutnick, chairman and CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, to be the next Secretary of Commerce. In the announcement, Trump said, quote, "He will lead our tariff and trade agenda with additional direct responsibility for the Office of the United States Trade Representative," end quote. The elevated trade role for Lutnick raises questions about what role, if any, might go to Robert Lighthizer, who served as Trump's trade representative in the first term and is very hawkish on China. Indeed, as veteran China analyst Bill Bishop observed today, quote, "If Lighthizer does not have a significant role in the upcoming Trump administration, then Beijing will be pleased. And if Elon Musk has a role in selecting the next head of Commerce's BIS, then both Beijing and semiconductor firms may be very pleased," end quote. President-elect Trump campaigned on a strict China trade agenda, so even without a Lighthizer role, it seems likely that the new administration will still take a firm stance on trade. Indeed, in October, Lutnick said in a CNBC interview, quote, "Tariffs are an amazing tool for the president's use," end quote, adding that the next administration should, quote, "use tariffs to build in America. If we want to make it in America, tariff it. Or if we're competing with it, tariff it," end quote. And of course, as we've discussed already, many of Trump's other picks are very hawkish on China too. Meanwhile, UK-based The Financial Times this week writes that Xie Feng, Beijing's ambassador to Washington, quote, "has in recent months stepped up an outreach in Washington by hosting dozens of former US officials and China experts at his home. The engagements have become more important following Donald Trump's election victory because the Chinese embassy has had far more interaction with Democrats during Joe Biden's presidency," end quote. Evan Medeiros, a former White House Asia official, said Trump's victory caught China flat-footed, telling the outlet, quote, "They were scrambling around Washington and New York to find connections to Trump. They were asking Democratic analysts how to manage the Trump team. They essentially have one play: persuade business leaders around Trump to go soft on China," end quote. If that is their only play, they may be in for some surprises. Next up, yesterday, Tuesday, a car drove into a crowd of children who were arriving for school in a city in central Hunan province. This coming just 1 week after a man drove into about 100 people in Zhuhai and days after a mass knife attack in Yixing, Jiangsu province. According to state media, no one was killed, several children were injured, the driver was detained, and it is not clear if the incident was intentional or accidental. Whether intentional or not, the incident has re-sparked worries across the country over a spate of violent attacks over the past week, and Beijing is treating it like it was intentional, kicking the security and public opinion management apparatus into high gear. China's top prosecutors met on Tuesday yesterday to discuss sentencing for so-called major vicious and extreme cases. Ying Yong, prosecutor general, in a public post on WeChat, expressed, quote, "The hand of strictness can never be loosened. We must be resolute and determined and punish crimes severely and quickly in accordance with the law to provide a strong deterrent," end quote. The thing is, the death sentence already exists in the mainland for people who engage in these mass attacks, so deterrence cannot be further increased. Only state control and surveillance over the population. State control and surveillance which already exists to a very high degree. As several China analysts have pointed out, the political and legal affairs system, and especially the SPP and Ministry of Public Security, will be under extreme pressure to respond to these increasingly frequent incidents as the economy slows and social and political pressure builds. Indeed, in recent weeks, the party's censors have been sending reporting guidance on such attacks to government-run media, requiring their reporting to align with police statements. In what is very telling, one official instruction leaked reads, quote, "The information of the perpetrators that hasn't been disclosed by the authorities, such as financial situation and marital status, should not be reported to speculate on their intention or to relate to other incidents on broader social issues," end quote. That is to say, the state does not want it to be made public that these attacks are being perpetrated by men who may be unmarried and or in economic distress. Xiao Jieqin, a Beijing-based psychotherapist and director at mental health non-profit Candle X, says that a pervasive sense of societal unfairness and disparity can lead in extreme cases to violence against random bystanders. Writing this week, quote, "Some people who were left behind and society and economically more marginalized can feel they are not being treated fairly, and some people who don't have enough emotional regulation, they have outbursts, sometimes violent outbursts." End quote. Next up, we move to Hong Kong. But just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are all tremendous helps for the channel. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below for those who want to keep the channel financially sustainable. One other quick thing. As I said over the weekend, for the next few weeks, this channel has reached out to a design company and will be A/B testing new thumbnails. Some of these thumbnails are a little bit more provocative than I would prefer to use, but testing so far, unfortunately, has shown that these greatly outperform the more sober and basic looking thumbnails. In order for the channel to be promoted by YouTube, including being shown to regular subscribers, I must meet minimum click-through thresholds. I will try my best to get a balance where these click-through rates are met while making sure they are not too over the top. Sometimes I will not always get that balance right. I hope that you will bear with me and be patient as I try to do so. As I've said before though, whatever happens with the titles and thumbnails, the content itself, these videos will remain the same. They will not change. They will remain grounded and sober. Much of what we're covering is very, very serious, and it is a shame that we have to play this YouTube game with the thumbnails and titles, but that is the reality of the platform. Thank you for your patience, your understanding, and all your support. Now let's continue, and our last development is especially serious. Yesterday, Tuesday, Hong Kong courts sentenced 45 people to prison terms under the Hong Kong's new controversial national security law. 2 more are still facing trial. Benny Tai was one of these. Tai, a college professor in Hong Kong, 4 years ago crafted a plan for the territory's pro-democracy opposition to win control of the local legislature, then trigger a confrontation with Beijing by forcing the central government's hand-picked Hong Kong leader to step down. What he viewed as a political maneuver perfectly acceptable under Hong Kong's constitution, Beijing saw as a criminal scheme to subvert the government. For this crime, yesterday he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Joshua Wong, who was a teenager and a leader of the 2014 Umbrella Movement protests, was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months. Claudia Mo, a former journalist and long-time legislator, was given 4 years and 2 months. Sentences for the remaining defendants ranged from just over 4 years to more than 7 years. In a courtroom that had to be created just to accommodate them, the 45 defendants sat shoulder to shoulder on Tuesday on long benches, behind a glass partition and flanked by police officers. A judge read their sentences aloud, referring to them not by their names but by the numbers on a list. The hearing and sentencing of all 45 took less than half an hour. Thomas Kellogg, the executive director of the Georgetown Center for Asian Law, said he thought the case would be seen by many in the international community as, quote, the final nail in the coffin for the rule of law in Hong Kong, end quote. The move quickly attracted international condemnation, including from the US. Shortly after the sentencing, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian expressed, quote, no one can engage in illegal activities under the guise of democracy and attempt to evade legal punishment. The central government firmly supports Hong Kong's special administrative region and safeguarding national security, end quote. He then accused the West of hypocrisy, saying that Western countries, quote, ignore that they maintain their own national security through judicial procedures while unjustly criticizing the Hong Kong courts for fairly implementing the national security law for Hong Kong, end quote. In response to the question from French outlet AFP, to quote the question, quote, a follow-up on the Hong Kong court sentencing, Taiwan also condemned the sentencing. What is the foreign ministry's response? End quote. Lin Jian responded, quote, Taiwan is a province of China, so what you asked about is not a matter related to foreign affairs, end quote. Today, Wednesday, Jimmy Lai, the billionaire former media mogul and critic of China's Communist Party, is set to testify in court for the first time in a separate national security case. Lai, a British citizen, faces up to life in prison on charges of conspiring to publish seditious material and, quote, collusion with foreign forces. End quote. Meanwhile, as all of this is happening in quite the contrast of optics, CEOs from Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and other institutions were in Hong Kong for the third annual Global Financial Leaders Investment Summit. Vice Premier He Feng was the PRC VIP speaker, and he promised that Beijing would, quote, continue to improve the policy system supporting the construction of Hong Kong as an international financial center, end quote. As we discussed yesterday, investment into mainland China is set to be negative for the first time since data became available in 1990. Speaking at the summit, Morgan Stanley Chief Executive Officer Ted Pick said there was still need for greater transparency in Chinese regulations and policy making, adding that battling deflation will take time and, quote, the name of the game is to reignite consumer confidence, end quote. David Solomon of Goldman Sachs said investors, quote, continue to be concerned, end quote, about cashing out of investments in the world's second largest economy, expressing, quote, it's been very difficult over the course of the last 5 years to get capital out. I think you've got a combination of issues that have global investors predominantly on the sidelines with respect to capital deployment, end quote. He added that investors would like to see, quote, an improvement in consumption, end quote, in China, and, quote, continued progress in the opening up of the capital markets, end quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.